Dogman Declassified, the latest book from W.J. Brendel, Ph.D. Real reports. Consistent patterns, no clear answers. Take a closer look at the evidence. Available now.
Welcome to Forever Paranormal, where shadows remember and silence has a way of speaking. I'm Dr. Bill, your guide through the strange and the unexplainable.
And I'm Deb. Every week we dig into what hides between belief and proof. Cryptids, hauntings, witchcraft, UFO sightings, and the stories people swear are true.
We don't tell you what to believe. We just look at what's possible, what's been witnessed, and what refuses to stay quiet.
If you like what we do, follow, rate, and share the show. It helps keep the lights on.
And if you want to go deeper, step inside the crypt. Patreon members get the show ad-free, a full day early, and gain access to our entire archives, years of investigations, bonus episodes, and conversations we don't release anywhere else. You can join at foreverparanormal.com or by searching Forever Paranormal The Crypt on Patreon.
And remember that you're never alone. If you ever need someone to talk to, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is 988.
A monk claimed he built a machine that could see the past. Most people dismiss the story immediately, right? But this week, we're going to ask a different question. Welcome back to Forever Paranormal, where we know Natinek is more than a myth and where the veil is thin. Ghosts walk beside us, strange craft drift above us, and creatures move just out of sight. Every story is a door between worlds, and this week we step through one of the strangest technological mysteries ever proposed. A machine that allegedly allowed its operators to observe the past itself. Hi there, Debbie.
Hello, Bill.
So what kind of news do you have for us this week?
Obviously, we are still talking about the release of UFO files and government transparency.
Yeah.
Even famous figures such as Steven Spielberg are chiming in with their thoughts on the subject. And in other news, apparently there was a restraining order issued preventing unauthorized visits to the Conjuring House during a battle for ownership of the infamous site.
Yeah, that one kind of took a weird turn because one of the ghost hunter guys claimed he owned it and the family still claimed they owned it, so I think it's still in court. Anyhow, sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. Also, a phantom construction worker has been spotted on dash cam footage in Massachusetts. And in New Mexico, the body of a missing woman who worked at the Los Alamos National Laboratory has been found 11 months after she vanished. Although Melissa Cassius's role was administrative in nature, it probably afforded her access to some secretive files. It is unclear if that is linked to the string of disappearances of scientists and other military officials and whether there is any connection between them.
Yeah, I read up on this one too, and it seems like the one report calls her an administrative assistant or something. But all the news headlines and stuff call her the missing scientist, which confuses me. Was she a scientist? Maybe in an administrative role or something, but I don't know. But I do know the sheriff said they found a handgun near her body, but he's not declaring it suicide. There's some other stuff there that they didn't report on that leads them to believe it was not a suicide. So it just continues to be strange.
Yep, time will tell.
Yes. Deb, most paranormal researchers have heard the name at least once, right? Usually the story gets reduced to a simple point. A Benedictine monk claimed to have developed a machine that could observe the past. And the Vatican supposedly became involved. They always do. Photographs surfaced. Skeptics challenged them. End of story. But the deeper you dig, the stranger it gets.
I am sensing this is one of those stories where almost everybody has an opinion before they even hear the details.
Exactly. Because people tend to sort it into two categories immediately. Either it's a secret machine that changed history, or it's just complete nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
But for this episode, I'm not interested in either one of those positions, believe it or not. I want to understand how the story evolved and why people still talk about it decades later. Because the central figure wasn't who most people imagine. Pellegrino Ernetti wasn't known as a paranormal investigator at all. He was a Benedictine monk, a scholar, an accomplished musicologist, and much of his academic work involved ancient music, liturgical traditions, and the recovery of historical knowledge from the distant past. And that's what makes this story unusual. His reputation wasn't built on extraordinary claims at all. The extraordinary claims came later.
Which draws my attention a little more than somebody who spent 30 years claiming everything as a conspiracy.
Hey, I never claimed everything was a conspiracy, but just the same here, Deb. It doesn't mean that he's right, but it does explain why people listen. According to the story, everything began while Ernetti was working with Father Agostino Gemelli. The two men were reportedly involved in experiments dealing with sound recordings and vocal analysis. During one session, the equipment allegedly began malfunctioning, and being frustrated, Gemelli reportedly called out to his deceased father, and according to the story, a voice answered.
That's creepy.
Yeah, I guess so, because it doesn't start with the machine, it starts with some random voice, right? The story claims the voice was later identified as Gemelli's father, and he supposedly even used a childhood nickname known only to the two of them. Whether any of that actually happened, well, it's impossible to verify today. But according to Ernetti, that incident started a chain of questions. If information from the past could somehow be recovered, what else might be recovered?
That's a big leap from a strange voice on a recording.
Yeah, I have to agree. It's a huge leap. But that's where the Chronovisor enters the story, Deb. Because according to Ernetti, researchers eventually developed a device capable of isolating and reconstructing events from the past. Not time travel, mind you, but observation. That's an important distinction. The machine wasn't supposed to transport anyone anywhere. It supposedly functioned more like a receiver, right? Something capable of locating and reconstructing information from previous moments in time.
Which sounds slightly less insane than time travel.
Well, only slightly, because now we have a different problem. If every moment leaves some kind of trace, how do you find it? According to Ernetti, the machine could do exactly that. He claimed it was used to observe ancient Roman events. He claimed it recovered performances lost to history. Most famously, he claimed it allowed observers to witness the crucifixion of Jesus. But one detail always stands out to me. He also claimed it could locate individual people, specific moments, specific conversations, including his own father.
That hardly seems believable to me.
I have to agree 100%. Watching a famous historical event is one thing, but finding a single person's voice among all of human history is something else entirely. And that's where the story starts becoming less about a machine and more about information. Because if any of this were possible, the obvious question becomes, how? How would reality preserve that information? How would a machine find it? How would it know where to look? And maybe most importantly, how would it know the difference between a real signal and just noise?
Okay, that's the question.
Exactly, because once you ask that question, the Chronovisor stops being a story about some mysterious machine. It now becomes a story about the nature of reality itself. And that's where we're going to go next, because there are several theories that might explain how such a machine could work. Some are ancient, some are modern, some are surprisingly close to ideas people discuss today, and some raise even bigger questions than the chronovisor itself.
So, where do we start?
But you know, Deb, I think we should start with the oldest idea. The idea that reality somehow remembers everything. Because when you strip away the technology, well, that's really what the chronovisor claims. Not that someone invented time travel, not that someone stepped into a machine and visited ancient Rome. The claim is much simpler. Something from the past was still there to be observed.
Which sounds simple until you think about it.
Exactly. And that's because most of us live with the assumption that the past is gone, right? Yesterday happened. It's over. It's gone. Last year happened. It's over. The people are gone. The moments are gone. The conversations are gone. At least that's how we tend to think about it. But throughout history, there have been traditions that saw things very differently.
You're talking about things like the Akashic Records?
That's probably the best known example, yeah. The basic idea is that reality somehow preserves information. Every thought, every action, every experience. Whether somebody believes that literally or symbolically, Deb, isn't really important right now. What people keep returning to is the same question. What if nothing is ever truly lost?
I can see why that would appeal to people.
Yeah, of course it does. Think about it. Everybody has somebody they wish they could speak to just one more time. Everybody has questions they wish they could answer. And everybody has moments they wish they could revisit, right? The idea that reality somehow preserves these moments is deeply comforting, or maybe terrifying. The problem is that comfort isn't evidence, and neither is terror, but
Well, that's fair.
yeah, and that's where I think this first theory runs into trouble. It sounds beautiful, it feels meaningful, but it doesn't tell us how any of it works. I mean, where is the information stored? How is it preserved? How would anyone access it? I mean, the theory creates more questions than answers.
Which brings us back to the machine.
Exactly, because if Ernetti's claims are true, the machine wasn't just finding the information, it was finding specific information. And that requires something more than a cosmic filing cabinet like the Akashic Records. It requires a search function.
Reality's version of Google?
Yeah, that's not actually a bad way to think about it, because if every moment in history is somehow preserved, locating one particular moment becomes the real challenge, right? And that's what led me to this second theory. Not because of mysticism, but because of radio.
Here we go.
Think about this, Deb. Radio broadcasts don't simply stop existing because we're finished listening to it, right? They continue moving forward and outward. Television broadcasts continue moving outward. Light continues moving outward. Signals continue traveling. The universe is already filled with information moving through it.
So, in theory, old broadcasts are still out there.
Well, actually, it's not theory. They are. They're incredibly weak. They're spread over unimaginable distances, but they didn't just hit a wall and disappear. That's what makes the Chronovisor story so fascinating, because it raises a question. If information continues to exist after it leaves its source, could it be recovered?
You are saying the machine may not have been looking into the past, it might have been looking for information from the past.
Exactly, like a radio wave or something. And that's a very important distinction, because one idea requires time travel. The other requires information retrieval. Those are completely different problems.
Information retrieval sounds a little less impossible.
A little, but not much, because another problem appears immediately. Let's assume every signal survives, all right? Every sound, every voice, every conversation. Fine. Now, go find one. Find one specific conversation two people had 50 years ago. How?
And that's where the whole thing falls apart for me.
Well, yeah, honestly, that's where it gets harder for me too, because recovering information is one challenge, locating the correct information is another. Imagine standing in the middle of every radio station signal, every television station signal, every conversation, every sound, every signal that has ever existed. Now, just pick one. Just pick one. That's essentially what Ernetti was claiming.
Which makes me wonder if we're even thinking about this correctly.
What do you mean?
Maybe we're assuming the machine was searching through information. What if it wasn't?
You know, now we're getting somewhere, because that's the question that eventually pulled me away from the information theory. Not completely away from it, though, but far enough that I started looking somewhere else, because maybe the biggest assumption we're making is that the past is gone. And if the past isn't gone, the entire conversation changes.
And now we're getting into the weird stuff.
Oh yeah, we are, because the third theory isn't really about information at all. It's about time itself. And I think that's where the Chronovisor story becomes much more interesting than some mysterious machine hidden inside a Vatican basement. Because what if? What if the machine wasn't recovering information from a vanished past? What if the past never actually vanished at all?
Okay, Bill, this is where a lot of people in the world are gonna get nervous
Well, maybe they should.
for many reasons.
Yes, because most of us never question time. We question politics. We question religion. We question science. But we rarely question time itself. We treat it as settled, right? The past is behind us. The future is ahead of us. The present is right now. So end of discussion.
I think that's how most people experience it. I know I do.
Yeah, well, so they do. But experiencing something a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that's how reality actually works. For centuries, people experienced the sun moving across the sky, and they concluded the sun revolved around the earth. It looked obvious, right? It felt obvious. Well, then it turned out the situation was a little more complicated than that. I'm not saying the same thing is happening with time right now. I'm saying perception has fooled us before.
So this is where your article about time starts creeping into the conversation?
Yes, it does. And folks, in case you're wondering, you can find the article on wjbrendel.com. It's a pretty good article. And it absolutely does that, because one of the questions I explored was whether time is actually a straight line at all. Most of us assume it is, because that's how consciousness appears to move, in a linear motion. We remember yesterday, we experience today, we anticipate tomorrow, and that feels pretty linear. But what if that's simply how we perceive reality rather than how reality itself is structured?
Can you walk me through that?
Sure, yeah, I can. Imagine you're standing beside a railroad track. You're seeing one train moving from left to right. From your perspective, the train is moving in a straight line, right? Because it's moving from left to right. Now imagine you're suddenly high above the entire rail system. You discover dozens of tracks. There are intersections, there's curves, there's loops, there's connections. Your perspective of a straight track changes completely, because the train wasn't wrong. It just wasn't seeing the whole system. You were just seeing a part of it. So you thought it was a straight line.
So you're suggesting consciousness might be riding one track through something much larger?
You know, that's probably the simplest way to describe it. Yeah, maybe time isn't a straight line. Maybe it's a structure. Maybe different moments exist beside one another rather than disappearing entirely.
Well, that sounds dangerously close to science fiction.
Yeah, I know, but stay with me, okay? Because the alternative is just as strange. Think about what we're actually saying when we talk about the past. We're saying entire years of reality simply cease to exist. They're gone forever. That's a pretty extraordinary claim, too, when you think about it, really. I mean, it's just gone?
I would never think about it that way.
most people don't because we're too busy living. I mean, sometimes we do, but most of the time we don't sit around wondering where Tuesday went. We just move on to Wednesday. But the Chronovisor story forces us to ask that question. Where did those moments go? If they vanished, then Ernetti's machine makes no sense. If they didn't vanish, then maybe we're asking the wrong questions.
Okay, so let's assume for a moment that the past still exists somehow. How does that help explain the chronovisor?
Because now the machine isn't searching through information, it's accessing a location. That's a completely different concept. Instead of recovering a signal from the past, it's interacting with another part of reality.
Like tuning into a neighboring station?
Exactly. And that's where the radio analogy becomes useful again. Not because radio proves anything at all, because it gives people a good mental picture. Let's say reality is like onions and contains layers. Most of the time, those layers remain separate. We move through our own experience and never notice anything else. But occasionally, something unusual happens. Maybe the layers drift close. Maybe they overlap. And maybe some information leaks through.
You're talking about things like deja vu.
Well, yeah, that's one example. It's not proof, but it's just an example. Because people have reported deja vu for centuries. That strange feeling that you've somehow experienced this exact moment before. Well, most researchers explain it as memory processing type of thing, right? And that's a perfectly reasonable explanation. But if time isn't strictly linear, some people would argue that there may be other possibilities worth discussing out there.
And then you get into time slips.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, stories where people claim they briefly encountered another period of time. Again, not proven, not accepted science, but the reports do exist. Then you got to take into account certain near-death experiences, certain mystical experiences, certain haunting reports, right? What interests me isn't whether every report is true. It's that many of them share a common theme here. The feeling that reality isn't behaving the way we expect it to.
So in this theory, the chronovisor wasn't reaching backward.
Yeah, that's where I find myself leaning. And if we're playing the thought experiment game here, I don't think the machine was looking backwards at all. I think it was looking across time, not backwards.
Across?
Across different regions of time, across different layers of reality, across moments that still exist but are normally inaccessible. And honestly, that's the first point in this entire story where the chronovisor begins feeling less like a machine from some science fiction movie and more like an attempt to interact with something fundamental about reality.
There's still one problem.
Only one?
Well, one very large one.
Okay.
If these layers exist, why aren't we constantly running into them? Why don't people see ancient Rome while walking through Walmart?
That's actually probably the strongest objection to the entire theory, Deb. Because if overlap is possible, why isn't it happening everywhere then? And that's where the fourth theory enters the conversation, because maybe the missing ingredient isn't time. Maybe it's consciousness, which is probably the most controversial theory of this entire episode. Not because it's necessarily stranger than the others, because it involves us.
People are usually comfortable talking about mysterious machines. They get uncomfortable when the conversation turns towards themselves.
Exactly. So let's look back to your question from a few minutes ago. Because if different layers of time exist, why don't we constantly experience them? Well, maybe because we're not capable of perceiving them or receiving them. Or maybe we're capable of perceiving them, but only under specific conditions.
What do you mean?
Well, you have meditation, you have mystical experiences, certain altered states, near-death experiences, remote viewing claims, deep prayer traditions. Again, it's not proof. But if you look across cultures and centuries, people have repeatedly described experiences that feel like they're accessing information outside of their normal awareness.
So maybe the machine wasn't doing all the work. Maybe the machine wasn't a television. Maybe it was an amplifier. Am I close?
Yeah, you are. If you think about radio, the signal already exists. The radio doesn't create the signal, right? The radio helps you tune into it. What if consciousness works the same way? What if information is already there? What if certain people occasionally access fragments of it all the time? Then the chronovisor becomes something very different. Not a machine that sees the past, a machine that enhances our perception.
Which would explain something that is bothering me about this story.
What's that?
Why would a machine even be necessary?
Exactly, that might be the right question, because if reality already contains the information, then maybe the challenge isn't creating access. Maybe it's about improving access. That's a much smaller leap conceptually.
That sounds more interesting than the machine itself.
Yeah, I think so too. Because now we're asking whether consciousness is more flexible than we assume. Whether it's capable of interacting with information in ways we don't fully understand, and that's a conversation people have been having for a very long time.
Okay, but before listeners think we've completely lost our minds, we should probably talk about the problems with the Chronovisor story.
Yeah, I agree, because there are some legitimate problems. The most famous is the photograph. According to Ernetti, the Chronovisor produced an image of Jesus during the crucifixion. Critics later pointed out that the image appeared remarkably similar to an existing statue that immediately raised questions.
And not small questions.
No, big questions. Then there's the larger issue. Nobody has ever produced a machine. No independent verification exists. No functioning chronovisor has ever been demonstrated. No research notes have surfaced that convince mainstream historians or scientists. And to me, those are some pretty serious problems.
So if somebody listening says, Bill, this entire thing sounds like a story, that's a fair criticism.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to say that, Dad, because the evidence for the chronovisor itself is extremely weak. The machine is actually the weakest part of the entire story.
That's an interesting way of putting it.
Yeah, I don't think the value of the mystery is the machine at all. The value is the questions it forces us to ask. Questions about information, questions about memory, questions about consciousness, and questions about time. Those questions remain interesting whether the chronovisor existed or not.
Okay, Bill. We've been talking about all these possibilities. We've talked about reality as a recording device, information that never disappears, non-linear time, consciousness as a receiver. So let me ask the obvious question. After looking at all of it, where do you land?
Well, honestly, I don't think the strongest explanation is any single theory at all. You know me. I think it's a combination. I don't know whether Pellegrino Ernetti ever built the machine he claimed to build. I don't know whether the chronovisor ever existed. But if there's one thing this story has made me question, it's the assumption that the past just simply disappears. The more I look at reports on near-death experiences, certain mystical traditions, consciousness research, and even some of the stranger experiences people report through their lives, the more I have to wonder if reality preserves far more information than we realize. Maybe information survives. Maybe moments survive. Maybe consciousness occasionally brushes against those moments in ways we don't understand. And if that's true, then perhaps the chronovisor wasn't really a machine designed to look into the past. Perhaps it was an attempt to access a past that never completely left.
That's a different idea than time travel.
Yeah, it is, Deb. And whether it's right or wrong, I think it's the most interesting possibility. Because if time isn't the straight line we assume it is, then maybe the chronovisor wasn't a mystery at all. Time itself was. Well, at least until next time, when we discuss another tale yet to be told. Thanks for listening to Forever Paranormal. Follow, rate, and share the show. It helps others find us and keeps the stories coming. Step inside the crypt for archive and exclusive episodes at foreverparanormal.com. And keep up with my latest books and research at wjbrendel.com. And until next time, remember, the veil is always thinner than you think.
Whatever you do, don't look behind you. Run!
If you've missed an episode or want to hear them all, step inside the crypt. It's where every past episode of Forever Paranormal lives, along with exclusive bonus shows you won't hear anywhere else. Join us at foreverparanormal.com and unlock the archives.